At 11:40 in the morning, sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, flooding the massive hall with pale winter light. The floor gleamed with reflections of moving feet, rolling suitcases, and hurried shadows. Voices echoed, announcements, footsteps, the low hum of a city that never paused. In the middle of all that motion sat a man who did not stand. His name was Ethan Ace Carter, and he had no legs. From the knees down, there was nothing, only thick bandages, metal braces held together with worn straps, and hands that were far stronger than they should have been. Ethan moved using his arms, pushing a low luggage cart, navigating the terminal with a practiced rhythm that came from years of necessity, not choice. Most people didn't notice him. Some looked away. A few stared for half a second too long. Ethan didn't mind anymore. He had learned how to exist without asking for attention, how to become invisible in one of the busiest places in America. But that morning, everything was about to change. From the far entrance of the terminal, a sound cut through the noise, a voice breaking with panic. "Please, please help us!" A man in his 40s ran inside, his face drained of color, his arms shaking as he pushed a portable medical bassinet. Inside, it lay a newborn baby, impossibly small, connected to wires and softly beeping monitors. The baby's lips were tinged blue. Tiny arms twitched in short, frightening spasms. Behind him came chaos. A woman stumbled forward, crying openly. An elderly grandmother struggled in a wheelchair. 3 young children clung to each other in fear, and scattered behind them, 8 large suitcases dropped and dragged across the terminal floor. A transit officer's voice rang out from above. "Final boarding for Gate 79. Doors close in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. The father turned in a slow, desperate circle, scanning the terminal for help. His eyes landed on Ethan, on the man without legs. He rushed over, almost tripping as he stopped in front of him. "Sir, please," he said, his voice cracking. "My baby needs to get to another hospital. If we miss this bus, he might not make it. I'll pay you. Anything. Just help us." Ethan looked at the infant, then at the 8 suitcases, then down at his own bandaged legs, already darkening through the gauze. He hadn't slept much. He hadn't eaten enough. And his body was burning with a fever he'd been trying to ignore. The clinic doctor had been clear just days earlier. "You have weeks. Maybe less." Ethan swallowed. He knew the distance. He knew the crowd. He knew what it would cost his body to even try. For a brief moment, he almost said no. And then the baby convulsed again. The mother fell to her knees, sobbing. The grandmother whispered prayers under her breath. The children cried. Something inside Ethan broke open. He lifted his eyes to the father and spoke slowly, clearly. "I don't have legs," he said. A pause. "But I'll carry it." The man stared at him, stunned. "I'll carry your bags," Ethan continued. "Take your baby to the gate. Go. Now." If this moment is already touching your heart, take a second to subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And what time is it where you are? Your presence here matters more than you know. The father didn't argue. He nodded, tears streaming down his face, and turned back toward the gate with his family. Ethan rolled forward. He tied 2 suitcases together with a frayed strap from his bag, pulled another close with his arm, hooked the edge of the cart with a motion perfected through pain and repetition. As he pushed into the moving crowd, sunlight caught the sweat on his forehead and the dark red seeping through his bandages. People stepped aside, some stared, some raised their phones. Ethan didn't see them. All he saw was a baby fighting to breathe. "Just let him live," Ethan whispered, more prayer than words. "Just let him live." He moved inch by inch through the terminal, arms trembling, heart pounding, knowing deep down that whatever happened next would not be small. Because sometimes the greatest miracles don't begin with power. They begin with someone saying yes, when everything inside them says it's impossible. And Ethan Carter was about to discover what happens when you choose to carry a burden you were never meant to carry alone. Ethan Carter had learned how to measure time differently than most people, not in hours or days, but in how much pain his body could still endure. For nearly 6 years, the Port Authority bus terminal had been his entire world. Not a home, just a place where he existed, slept when security allowed it, ate when kindness found him, worked when his arms could still lift. He stayed in a narrow maintenance alcove behind the old ticket offices, a space barely large enough for a thin mattress and a backpack. The concrete floor never warmed, even in summer. In winter, it stole heat straight from the bones. Every morning, Ethan wrapped his legs the same way. Clean cloth first, then gauze. Then the metal braces, imperfect, handmade, held together with bolts scavenged from scrapyards and reinforced with duct tape that peeled a little more each week. They weren't prosthetics. They were survival tools. The problem was, survival came at a cost. Where metal rubbed against flesh, wounds formed. Where wounds formed, infection followed. By December, the pain had changed. It no longer came and went. It stayed, a deep, pulsing heat that spread upward into his core. 3 days earlier, Ethan had gone to a walk-in clinic on 9th Avenue because the dizziness scared him more than the pain. The doctor, a tired woman with kind eyes, had barely touched his legs before stepping back. "These wounds are necrotic," she said quietly. "The infection is spreading. If it reaches your bloodstream—" She didn't finish the sentence. Ethan already knew how it ended. "What are my options, Dia?" he asked. The doctor exhaled. "Amputation higher up. Real prosthetics. Antibiotics. Hospital care." Ethan gave a slow nod. "And if I can't afford that?" The doctor looked at the floor. "Then you need a miracle," she said. Ethan left with a small bottle of antibiotics, a warning, and a truth he couldn't escape. He was living on borrowed days. Still, the next morning, he came back to the terminal. Because hunger didn't wait. Because pain didn't pay rent. And because, deep down, Ethan believed something he never said out loud, that as long as he could still help someone, his life still had meaning. In his wallet, tucked behind an expired ID, he carried one thing he never looked at for long. A small photograph. A little boy with dark hair and a missing front tooth standing in front of a birthday cake. 3 candles burned unevenly on top. Noah, his son. Ethan hadn't seen him since that picture was taken. 8 years had passed since the accident. 8 years since the phone call stopped. 8 years since the last letter was returned, unopened. Sometimes, late at night, Ethan whispered Noah's name like a prayer. Sometimes he cursed God for taking everything. Most days, he did both. That morning, as he dragged 8 suitcases through the terminal with blood seeping through his bandages, Ethan didn't know if he would live to see another sunrise, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. If this was how his story ended, it would not end with him turning away from someone in need, because even without legs, even without a future, Ethan Carter still believed that choosing love mattered, and that belief was about to change everything. The accident happened on a clear morning in May of 2011. There was nothing dramatic about the weather. No storm, no warning signs, just sunlight reflecting off steel and concrete, and the steady rhythm of a workday beginning like any other. Ethan Carter was 24 years old then, strong, restless, certain that hard work could fix anything. He worked on a construction site just outside the city, long hours, loud machines, the smell of oil and dust clinging to his clothes when he came home. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough. Enough to keep the lights on. Enough to dream about something better. That morning, He kissed his wife goodbye and ruffled his son's hair before heading out the door. "I'll be back before dinner," he said. It was the last promise he would ever make as the man he used to be. Near midday, the crew was rushing to finish a delivery before the next shipment arrived. A steel beam hung suspended from a crane, swaying slightly as workers shouted instructions over the noise. Ethan stepped forward to guide it into position. Someone yelled. Someone slipped. And in the space of a single breath, everything went wrong. The beam shifted. The rigging failed. And 2 tons of steel came crashing down. Ethan never saw it coming. The impact threw him backward. Pain exploded through his body with a violence so complete it stole his breath, his voice, his sense of time. When he looked down, the world tilted. His legs were gone. Not severed cleanly, crushed, mangled, destroyed beneath the knees in a way that no amount of strength could undo. The next moments came in fragments, screams, sirens, hands pressing down, trying to stop the bleeding, a sky so blue it felt cruel. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness in the ambulance, his mind clinging to one thought. I have a son. He woke up in a hospital room hours later, wrapped in machines and silence. The pain was everywhere, white-hot and relentless, but worse than the pain was the absence. He lifted the sheet and screamed. Doctors spoke gently. Nurses avoided his eyes. Forms were signed. Surgeries were scheduled. They told him he was lucky to be alive. Ethan didn't feel lucky. Weeks passed. Then months. Bills arrived faster than answers. Insurance covered some things, not others. Physical therapy started and stopped. Promises were made and broken. Lauren came every day at first, then every other day, then once a week. She tried to be strong, tried to smile, tried to believe the man she loved was still there. But love under pressure can fracture. Arguments started quietly, then grew louder, about money, about the future, about what their son would see. One afternoon, Lauren stood at the foot of Ethan's hospital bed, Noah's small hand wrapped tightly in hers. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice flat from exhaustion. "I didn't sign up to raise a child watching his father crawl." Ethan felt the words hit harder than the steel beam ever had. She left that day. The divorce papers came later. By the time Ethan was discharged, he was no longer a husband, no longer a father in the way that mattered. He was a man without legs, without a family, without a clear reason to keep going. And yet, somehow, he did. Because even after everything was taken, something inside Ethan Carter refused to die. And that stubborn spark, born in pain and loss, was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. The silence didn't arrive all at once. At first, it came in small gaps. Missed phone calls, delayed replies, a text left unread but never answered. Ethan told himself it was temporary, that Lauren just needed time, that once he learned how to move again, once he proved he could still be a father, everything would settle. So he tried. He called on Noah's birthday, left messages on holidays, mailed letters with shaky handwriting, and too many apologies folded inside. Most of them came back unopened. Others disappeared into nothing. After the 3rd year, the phone stopped ringing entirely. Lauren changed numbers, blocked emails, returned one final letter with 3 words written across the envelope in thick black ink. "Please stop trying." Ethan stared at those words for a long time before setting the letter down. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just sat there, alone in a rented room that smelled like bleach and old carpet, feeling something quietly collapse inside his chest. 8 years is a long time to live without being needed. Ethan drifted from job to job, whatever work someone would give a man without legs. He cleaned floors on his hands, sorted recycling, repaired tools, slept on couches when friends still existed, then in shelters when they didn't. Eventually, he found his way to New York. No one asked questions there. No one cared where you came from or what you had lost. At the Port Authority bus terminal, Ethan discovered something unexpected. People always needed help. Suitcases were heavy. Stairs were unforgiving. And travelers in a hurry rarely noticed who helped them, as long as the help came. Ethan learned to move fast, using only his arms, learned how to balance weight, learned how to read people in a glance, who would tip, who would pretend not to see him. They called him names sometimes. The legless porter, the crawling guy, Ace, when they wanted to be kind. He accepted them all. At night, when the terminal quieted, Ethan would sit against a concrete pillar and watch families pass by, parents holding hands with children half asleep on their shoulders. That was when the memories came hardest. Noah, at 3 years old, asking why Daddy couldn't chase him. Noah crying the first night Ethan wasn't home. Noah growing up somewhere Ethan couldn't reach. Some nights, Ethan prayed. Not long prayers, not pretty ones, just fragments. God, keep him safe. God, let him forgive me. God, don't let him think I didn't try. Other nights, he didn't pray at all. He cursed. He blamed. He wondered what kind of God watched a man lose his legs and then his child. But even on his angriest nights, Ethan never threw away the photograph in his wallet. He carried it everywhere, creased, faded, worn soft at the edges, proof that once he had been someone's whole world. By the 8th year, Ethan had stopped expecting anything to change. No miracles, no reunions, no second chances. Just another day, another ache, another quiet night in a terminal full of strangers. So when a desperate father ran toward him with a dying baby in his arms, when 8 suitcases lay scattered across the floor, when the clock started counting down those 10 minutes, Ethan didn't see it as a turning point. He saw it as one last chance to do something right. And sometimes the longest silence ends not with a voice from heaven, but with a choice made on the ground by someone who has nothing left to lose. The terminal clock flipped to 11:42 a.m. 8 minutes. That was all that remained before Gate 79 would close. The father, Daniel, was pacing in tight circles now, one hand gripping the handle of the portable bassinet, the other clutching his hair like he was trying to keep his mind from breaking apart. The monitor attached to the baby gave off a sharp, uneven rhythm. Beep, 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 beep. Each sound felt like a countdown to something irreversible. "Please," the mother whispered again, her voice raw from crying. She was still on her knees, palms pressed against the cold tile floor, rocking slightly back and forth as if the movement alone could keep her baby alive. Ethan stopped moving. For the first time since he had agreed to help, the full weight of what he was about to attempt settled into his bones. 8 suitcases, not carry-on bags, real luggage, thick fabric, overpacked, the kind families use when they're leaving home for something they hope is temporary but fear might not be. Ethan glanced at the distance. Hundreds of feet, a sea of people, security barriers, a narrowing corridor that funneled travelers straight toward the gate. He could already feel the pain spreading upward from his legs, the dull pressure behind his eyes that came when the fever surged. This wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. "Sir," Ethan said quietly, turning back to Daniel, "I need you to listen to me." Daniel froze. "I don't know if I can get all of this there in time," Ethan continued. "I'm going to try, but you can't wait for me. You have to take your family and your baby and go. Now." Daniel's mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes filled with terror. "But the bags—" "Don't think about the bags," Ethan said firmly. "Think about your son." At the sound of that word, something in Daniel shattered. He nodded, choking back a sob, and turned to his wife. "Sophia," he whispered, "we have to move." As they lifted the bassinet together, the grandmother reached out and grabbed Ethan's sleeve. God sees you, she said softly, her eyes shining. Whatever happens, he sees you. Ethan swallowed hard. He turned back to the luggage. His hands moved on instinct now. He looped a strap through two handles and tied them together, pulled another suitcase close with his forearm, jammed the edge of the cart beneath the heaviest one, and leaned his weight into it. The first pull sent a white-hot bolt of pain shooting through his legs. Ethan gasped. The bandages darkened almost immediately. Someone nearby muttered, "This is insane." Another voice said, "Someone should stop him." But no one did. The terminal didn't slow down. People brushed past him, stepping around the dragging suitcases, irritation flickering across their faces. A man bumped into Ethan's shoulder and kept walking. A woman stared, then looked away. Ethan dragged himself forward inch by inch, arms shaking, breath coming in short bursts. 8 minutes, he thought. Just keep moving. He didn't look back to see if the family had made it ahead. He couldn't, because if he stopped, even for a second, he knew he wouldn't be able to start again. "Jesus," Ethan whispered under his breath, not sure whether it was a prayer or a habit left over from a life he barely remembered. "I don't need a miracle," he said, pulling harder. "I just need enough strength for today." And as the crowd surged around him and the clock kept ticking down, Ethan Carter crossed the point of no return. From here on out, everything would be paid for in blood, in faith, or in both. The crowd thickened as Ethan pushed deeper into the terminal. What had looked manageable from a distance now felt endless. A moving wall of bodies, rolling luggage, and impatience. Every few feet, someone cut in front of him. Every few seconds, a suitcase clipped a heel or slammed into a knee. Ethan kept going. His arms were burning now, the muscles trembling with each pull. The makeshift braces scraped against the floor, sending vibrations straight into the raw flesh beneath the bandages. The pain no longer came in sharp spikes. It spread, heavy and suffocating, like fire wrapped in cloth. 30 feet. That was all he'd managed in what felt like an eternity. A wave of dizziness hit him without warning. The ceiling lights blurred. The voices around him melted into a low roar. Not now, he thought. Please, not now. He stopped for half a second, just long enough to catch his breath. It was a mistake. The moment he paused, his arms weakened. The weight of the suitcases shifted. One strap slipped loose, and a bag toppled sideways, spilling clothes across the polished floor. Someone groaned loudly. Another voice snapped, "Come on, man!" Ethan dropped to one elbow, scrambling to pull the suitcase upright. His hand slid through something wet. Blood. It soaked through the gauze, dark and unmistakable against the pale tile. A security guard nearby hesitated, taking a step forward, then stopping. "Sir," he called out, uncertain, "are you okay?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't afford the air it would take to speak. He clenched his jaw and forced his arms to lock again, muscles screaming as he hauled the bag back into place. The strap cut into his shoulder, but he welcomed the pain. Pain meant he was still moving. 40 feet. The clock overhead ticked forward. 11:45 a.m. 5 minutes. Ethan's breathing turned ragged. His vision narrowed, the edges darkening. He could feel the fever surging, heat pooling behind his eyes, sweat running down his spine, despite the cold air blasting through the terminal vents. Somewhere in the crowd, a child began to cry. The sound pierced him. It reminded him of Noah, of the way his son used to cry when he couldn't find Ethan in a room, the panic rising instantly, without logic. "I'm here," Ethan thought, though he didn't know who he was saying it to anymore. "I'm still here." His arms gave out. Ethan collapsed forward, the cart lurching as the suitcases slammed down around him. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. For a moment, he lay there, chest pressed to the floor, unable to move. This was it. This was where it ended. People gathered in a loose circle now, curiosity mixing with discomfort. Phones appeared. Someone whispered, "This is hard to watch." Ethan closed his eyes. "I tried." He thought, "God, I tried." That was when he heard it. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a voice, close, steady, calm. "Hey." Ethan's eyes fluttered open. A shadow fell across the light in front of him. "Need a hand, son?" Ethan turned his head slowly. Standing beside him was an older man, late 60s, maybe early 70s. He wore worn jeans, a simple white shirt, and a faded red scarf draped loosely around his shoulders. His shoes were dusty, like he'd walked a long way to get here. But it was his eyes that made Ethan freeze. They weren't hurried. They weren't curious. They were filled with a quiet certainty that cut through the chaos like still water. I can't," Ethan rasped. "I don't have time." The man smiled gently. "That's all right," he said. "We'll make time." Before Ethan could respond, the man reached down and lifted one of the heaviest suitcases with ease. Too much ease. He picked up a second, then a third, stacking them in his arms as if they weighed nothing at all. Ethan stared. "Sir," he whispered. "You don't understand." "I understand," the man said softly. "More than you think." The crowd parted without anyone asking them to, and as the two of them began to move forward together, one dragging Hope with bloodied arms, the other carrying weight no human should, Ethan felt it. Not strength, not relief, but the unmistakable sense that he was no longer alone. They moved faster than Ethan thought possible. The older man walked ahead, his pace steady, confident, never once looking back to see if Ethan could keep up. Somehow, Ethan did. His arms still screamed in protest. His chest burned with every breath. But the moment that man stepped beside him, something shifted. Not in his body. In the air. The crowd seemed to thin without explanation. People stepped aside as if guided by instinct, creating a narrow path straight through the terminal. No one argued, no one complained. It was as if urgency itself had taken shape and begun walking with them. Ethan dragged the remaining suitcases, his hands numb now, pain dulled into a heavy ache that spread up his arms and into his shoulders. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan asked between breaths. The man didn't slow down. "Because someone needs help," he replied simply. "That's not—" Ethan swallowed. "Most people don't stop." The man glanced over his shoulder then, his eyes meeting Ethan's for the first time since they started moving. "I'm not most people." They passed a large digital clock mounted above the corridor. 11:46, 4 minutes. Ethan felt panic claw at his throat. "We're not going to make it," he said. "The gate's too far." The man nodded, as if Ethan had just stated the obvious. "That's why you didn't stop," he said. "You knew turning back would break you." Ethan didn't answer, because the man was right. They turned a corner, and Gate 79 came into view at the far end of the hall. A line of passengers stood waiting, documents in hand. The bus driver paced nearby, checking his watch. Daniel and his family were there. The father stood clutching the bassinet, rocking it gently, his lips moving in silent prayer. Sophia's face was streaked with tears, her eyes fixed on the hallway like she was willing Ethan forward with sheer force. When she saw him, when she saw them, her hand flew to her mouth. "They're here," she whispered. "They're here." Ethan's vision blurred. 3 minutes. He pulled harder, feeling something tear beneath the bandages. Warmth spread down his legs, but he didn't look. He couldn't. "Sir," Ethan gasped, his voice barely audible over the noise. "I don't even know your name." The man adjusted his grip on the suitcases, carrying them as easily as grocery bags. "Names matter less than timing," he said, "and this moment matters." They reached the gate just as the driver lifted his arm. "That's it," he called. "Doors are closing." "Wait!" Daniel shouted. The driver hesitated, eyes falling on Ethan, on the blood, the dragging braces, the older man carrying an impossible load. Something softened in his expression. 30 seconds, he said. "That's all I can give you." The luggage hit the ground. Ethan collapsed forward, his arms giving out as soon as the weight was gone. He barely registered Daniel's hands gripping his shoulders, Sophia's voice breaking as she thanked him over and over. "You saved our son," Daniel said, his words thick with emotion. "I don't know how—" Ethan shook his head weakly. "Go," he whispered. "Please, just go." They did. The doors closed. The engine roared to life, and the bus pulled away. Ethan lay on the floor, staring up at the ceiling, the sounds of the terminal fading into a distant echo. The older man knelt beside him. "You did well," he said. Ethan laughed once, a broken, breathless sound. "I didn't even make it," he murmured. "You did?" The man's smile was gentle. "No," he said. "You carried this long before I arrived." Ethan turned his head slightly, confusion flickering through the haze. What should I call you?" The man considered the question, just for a moment. "People have called me many things," he said, "but you can call me Jesus." Ethan blinked. "Jesus?" he repeated faintly. That's a common name." The man chuckled softly. "Is it?" Ethan wanted to ask more, wanted to understand. But the strength drained from his body all at once, leaving only exhaustion and a strange, overwhelming peace. As his eyes closed, he felt a hand rest gently on his shoulder, warm, steady. And for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't afraid of what came next. Because whatever was about to happen, he knew, with a certainty deeper than pain, that he had not carried this burden alone. Ethan didn't know how long he lay there. Seconds, maybe, a minute. Time felt thin, like something stretched too far and ready to tear. The sounds of the terminal drifted back slowly. Footsteps, a distant announcement, the low rumble of the bus pulling away. He opened his eyes. The older man, Jesus, was still kneeling beside him, one hand resting lightly on Ethan's shoulder, not gripping, not holding him down, just there. "You need to sit up," the man said gently. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat burned. He swallowed and nodded once. The man helped him roll onto his side, then into a seated position. The movement should have sent knives of pain through Ethan's body. It didn't. There was discomfort, yes, a deep soreness, but the sharp, screaming agony that had ruled his every movement for years was quiet. Ethan frowned, confused. "That's not right," he murmured. Jesus smiled faintly, as if he had been waiting for Ethan to notice. "What are you feeling?" he asked. Ethan closed his eyes and took inventory of his body the way pain had trained him to do. "My legs," he said slowly. They don't feel like they're on fire anymore." The man nodded. "And your head?" "The fever's gone," Ethan whispered. "I don't feel dizzy." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The crowd had dispersed. Security had stepped back. Life at the terminal continued around them, unaware that something sacred was unfolding on its floor. Ethan looked down. The bandages around his legs were still there, darkened, stiff with dried blood, but beneath them something felt different, solid, grounded. "Sir," Ethan said, his voice trembling, "what did you do to me?" Jesus didn't answer right away. He reached out and tapped the concrete beside Ethan. "Put your hands here," he said. Ethan hesitated. "I can't stand," he said quickly. "I haven't stood in—" "Just try," Jesus replied. "I'll be right here." That was the moment fear finally arrived. Not the fear of pain, the fear of hope. Because if this didn't work, if Ethan tried and failed, he wasn't sure his heart could survive another disappointment. Still, he placed his hands on the floor. He leaned forward, and something happened. His body responded, not violently, not suddenly, but naturally, like a memory waking up. Muscles engaged. Balance shifted. Ethan felt weight transfer in a way that hadn't existed for 12 years. He gasped. "Oh my God," he breathed. Jesus tightened his grip slightly, not lifting Ethan, just steadying him. "Slowly," he said. Ethan pushed, and then he was upright, standing. The terminal didn't erupt. No one shouted. No choir sang. A man without legs stood on his feet in the middle of a busy transit hall, and the world kept moving as if this were nothing special. But to Ethan Carter, it was everything. His knees trembled, but they held. His feet he hadn't felt in over a decade, pressed into the floor, solid and real. He shifted his weight from one side to the other, tears blurring his vision. "I'm standing," he whispered. "I'm actually standing." Jesus' eyes were filled with something deeper than joy. They held recognition. "Take a step," he said. Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "No," he said. "I can't. Not yet." Jesus leaned closer. "You carried 8 suitcases without legs," he said. "You can take one step with them." Ethan inhaled. Then he moved his right foot forward. It landed. He moved the left. It landed too. A sob tore from his chest as he took another step, then another, each one small, unsteady, but undeniably real. He turned to Jesus, panic and awe colliding. "This shouldn't be possible," Ethan said. "Who are you?" Jesus met his gaze. "I am someone who knows what it means to carry weight," he said quietly. "To bleed for others, to be abandoned and still choose love." Ethan felt the words settle into him like truth, heavy and undeniable. "Why me?" he asked. "I'm not faithful. I'm not good. I doubted." Jesus shook his head gently. "You didn't stand because you believed perfectly," he said. "You stood because you were willing." And in that moment, Ethan understood. The miracle hadn't begun when he stood. It had begun when he chose to carry what no one else would. Ethan stood there longer than he meant to, not because his legs wouldn't move, but because his mind couldn't catch up. Around him, the terminal carried on exactly as before. People hurried past with coffee cups and rolling suitcases. A couple argued quietly near the ticket machines. A bus announcement echoed overhead, distorted by static. No one was watching him. No one was pointing. No one was screaming that a miracle had just taken place. And somehow, that made it feel even more real. Ethan looked down again, slowly, almost afraid that if he rushed, the moment would vanish. His legs were there, whole, strong enough to hold him, scarred only by time, not by loss. "I don't understand," he said quietly. Jesus stood beside him, hands relaxed at his sides, as calm as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "You don't need to," he replied. "Not yet." Ethan swallowed. His throat felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with pain. "Why now?" he asked. "Why today?" Jesus gestured gently toward the gate, where the bus had disappeared moments earlier. "Because today you chose someone else's life over your own," he said. "And love like that always opens doors." Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed. "I didn't do it for a miracle," he said. "I didn't even think I'd live." Jesus nodded. "That's exactly why it mattered." They walked together a few steps away from the gate, toward a quieter corner of the terminal where the noise softened and the light from the windows fell more gently. Ethan moved slowly, carefully, each step still a conversation between fear and trust. "You said your son's name is Noah," Jesus said suddenly. Ethan stopped. His heart lurched. "I never told you that," he said. Jesus turned to face him fully now. "No," he said softly. "You didn't." A chill ran through Ethan, though the air around them was warm. "Noah is 15 now," Jesus continued. "He has your eyes, and your stubbornness." Ethan's breath caught. "Where is he?" he asked, the question tearing free before he could stop it. Jesus' expression grew serious, but not sad. "He's here," he said, "in this city." Ethan's knees weakened, and he reached out instinctively for support. Jesus steadied him with a hand to the elbow. "He's been looking for you," Jesus went on, "not knowing where to search, not knowing if you even wanted to be found." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "I never stopped wanting him," he whispered. "Not for one day." "I know," Jesus said. "He knows too, even if he doesn't know how." Ethan wiped his face with the back of his hand, struggling to breathe. "Where?" he asked again. "Please." Jesus glanced toward the far windows, where the city stretched out in steel and sunlight. "There's a shelter a few blocks from here," he said. "He sleeps there at night. He works when he can. And every evening, before he closes his eyes, he asks God one thing." Ethan leaned forward, barely able to stand still. "He asks to find his father," Jesus said. The words shattered him. Ethan bent at the waist, hands braced on his knees, sobbing openly now, years of silence breaking loose all at once. "I failed him," he said. "I wasn't there. I wasn't strong enough." Jesus waited until Ethan looked up again. "Strength isn't measured by what you couldn't do," he said. "It's measured by what you're willing to do next." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'll go to him," he said. "Right now." Jesus smiled. "I know." They stood there for a moment longer, the space between them filled with something sacred and quiet. Ethan took a breath and straightened. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Jesus' eyes softened. "You already have," he said. "More times than you realize." Ethan blinked. When he looked again, Jesus was gone. No footsteps, no farewell, no trace, just sunlight on the floor, the distant noise of the terminal, and a man standing on his feet, no longer alone, no longer lost. And somewhere in the city beyond those walls, a boy named Noah was waiting. Ethan didn't run. He wanted to. Every instinct in him screamed to sprint out of the terminal, to chase the address Jesus had spoken, to find Noah before doubt could creep back in. But his body asked him to slow down. So he walked. Each step still felt unreal, like the ground might disappear if he trusted it too much. He focused on the rhythm. Heel, toe, breathe. Heel, toe, breathe. That was when he noticed the suitcases. They were stacked neatly near the edge of the terminal, just beyond a column of ticket machines, 8 of them, unmistakable in their scuffed fabric and mismatched handles. The same 8. Ethan stopped. A cold awareness slid down his spine. That can't be right. He had watched the family board the bus. He had seen the doors close. He had heard the engine pull away. Those bags had gone with them, hadn't they? Ethan approached slowly, half expecting them to vanish the closer he got. They didn't. He reached out and touched one handle. Solid. Real. A transit worker passed by and glanced at him. "Lost and found?" the man asked casually. Ethan shook his head, unable to speak. He knelt and unzipped the first suitcase. Inside wasn't clothing. It was paperwork. Neatly stacked envelopes. Official-looking documents. Money orders, each clipped together with careful precision. Not loose bills. Not anything flashy. Just provision. Enough to stop a man from worrying where his next meal would come from. Enough to cover hospital care. Enough to rent a small place. Enough to begin again, not in luxury, but in dignity. Ethan's chest tightened. He opened the second suitcase. More of the same. The third. The fourth. Each one held exactly what the first did. Nothing excessive. Nothing careless, just intentional abundance. At the bottom of the final suitcase lay a single envelope, plain, unmarked. Ethan opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a note, written in steady, familiar handwriting. You carried what you couldn't carry. You chose love when it cost you everything. So now you will not lack what you need for what comes next. This is not a reward. It is provision. Ethan pressed the paper to his chest. He thought of the clinic doctor's words, "You need a miracle." He thought of the shelter Jesus had described. He thought of a 15-year-old boy praying at night, asking to find a father who thought he had been forgotten. "This isn't for me," Ethan whispered aloud. A voice answered, not from behind him, not from the air, but from somewhere deep inside his chest. Exactly. Ethan sat there for a long time. He didn't count the money. He didn't plan what to buy. He prayed. Not the broken fragments he'd whispered for years, but full sentences, honest ones, grateful ones. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving me what I wanted, but what I needed." When he finally stood, Ethan zipped the suitcases closed and took hold of the handles. This time, the weight felt different, not lighter, purposeful. As he began to walk toward the terminal exit, the sunlight pouring through the doors felt warmer than before, kinder. He paused once, looking back at the gate where everything had changed. 8 suitcases, one choice, a God who provided without spectacle. Ethan stepped outside into the city. He didn't know exactly how Noah would react. He didn't know what forgiveness would look like, but he knew this. He wasn't walking toward his son empty-handed. He was walking toward him provided for. The shelter sat on a quiet street Ethan had passed 100 times without ever noticing. A brick building wedged between a closed laundromat and a discount grocery store. No sign of miracles, no hint that anything sacred lived inside its walls. Just a faded sign above the door and a set of steps worn smooth by years of coming and going. Ethan stopped across the street. His legs, his new legs, felt strong enough to carry him anywhere, but his heart wouldn't move. He checked the address again, even though he already knew it by memory. The words Jesus had spoken repeated in his mind with a clarity that terrified him. A shelter a few blocks from here. He sleeps there at night. He asks God to find his father. Ethan's hands trembled. What if Noah hated him? What if 8 years of silence had hardened into something unforgiving? What if his son had built a life where there was no room left for a father who arrived too late? Ethan crossed the street anyway. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from pain, but from fear. He climbed the steps slowly and reached for the door. His hand hovered there, frozen. "I carried 8 suitcases without legs," he told himself. "I can open one door with them." The door opened before he touched it. A woman in her 60s stood there, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes kind but cautious. "Yes?" she asked softly. Ethan swallowed. I'm looking for my son." Her expression changed instantly. "What's his name?" "Noah," Ethan said. "Noah Carter. He's 15. The woman's breath caught. "You're Ethan," she said, not a question. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. She stepped aside without another word. "Come in," she said. "Please." The shelter smelled like soap and soup, warm, human, safe in a way Ethan hadn't felt in years. Children's voices echoed faintly from somewhere upstairs. The woman led him down a hallway lined with donated coats and bulletin boards covered in handwritten prayers. "He's asleep," she said quietly. "He works mornings washing dishes, comes back exhausted." Ethan's chest tightened. They stopped outside a door labeled Teen Boys. The woman placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "He talks about you," she said gently. "More than you'd expect." Ethan nodded, tears already spilling. She opened the door slowly. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp near the far wall. Several beds lined the space, each occupied by a sleeping boy. At the end of the room, near a window, one figure lay curled slightly on his side. Ethan knew him immediately, not because he looked the same, but because he felt the same. The dark hair, the familiar curve of the jaw, the way his hand was tucked under his cheek like he'd done as a child. Ethan dropped to his knees. He pressed a hand to his mouth, his entire body shaking. "My son," he whispered. "My boy." Noah stirred. He shifted, frowned, then slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, confusion clouded his face. Then recognition struck. His eyes widened. "Dad?" he breathed. Ethan stood without thinking and crossed the room in 2 steps. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking completely. "It's me. I'm here." Noah sat up so fast the blanket fell to the floor. He stared at Ethan's face, at his legs, at the impossible reality standing in front of him. You're walking," Noah whispered. Ethan nodded, tears streaming. I know. There's so much I need to explain." Noah didn't wait. He launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around Ethan with a force that nearly knocked the breath from him. Ethan held him tightly, desperately, like a man afraid the world might try to take him away again. "I prayed," Noah sobbed into his shoulder. "I prayed every night. I knew you'd come." Ethan closed his eyes and wept. 8 years of silence shattered in that embrace. 8 years of guilt loosened their grip. Nothing else mattered. Because in that small room, in a quiet shelter, no one noticed. A father had come home. They sat together until the sky outside the shelter window shifted from deep blue to pale gray. Ethan didn't rush the conversation. He didn't try to explain everything at once. He simply stayed. For the first time in 8 years, he stayed. Noah leaned against him, head resting on Ethan's shoulder like he had when he was little. The boy listened quietly as Ethan spoke about the accident, the years that followed, the terminal, the baby, the suitcases, the man named Jesus. Noah didn't interrupt. When Ethan finished, the room felt impossibly still. After a long moment, Noah spoke. "I always knew you didn't leave because you didn't love me," he said softly. "I just didn't know how to find you." Ethan closed his eyes. "I should have found you sooner," he whispered. Noah shook his head. "You found me when it mattered." Morning came gently. The shelter stirred to life. Someone knocked on the door to announce breakfast. The woman from the night before smiled when she saw Ethan still there, still holding his son. "I'll give you some time," she said kindly. Later that day, Ethan returned to the terminal not to work, but to gather what little he owned. The 8 suitcases waited exactly where he had left them, untouched. This time, Noah walked beside him. Together, they opened them again, slowly, carefully. Noah's eyes widened as he saw the contents. "Dad, this is a lot." Ethan nodded. "It's enough," he said. "Not for luxury, for responsibility." They spent the afternoon talking, not dreaming wildly, not planning extravagantly, but imagining something simple and meaningful. Work, dignity, a way forward for people no one else saw. Within weeks, Ethan secured medical care. The infection that should have killed him never returned. His strength came back steadily, not just in his legs, but in his spirit. They rented a small apartment near the shelter. Ethan took classes to relearn how to walk properly. Noah enrolled in school again, catching up on what had been lost. And slowly, an idea took shape. Ethan remembered the people at the terminal, the veterans missing limbs, the men and women with injuries no one wanted to accommodate, the invisible workers who survived day to day without anyone asking what they needed. "We could help them," Noah said one night. "Not with charity, with jobs." So they did. They started small. A single van, a few moving contracts, flexible schedules, adapted equipment, fair pay. They hired people no one else would. A man with one arm, a woman with chronic pain, a veteran in a wheelchair who could plan routes better than anyone. They called it Carry Hope, not because it sounded inspiring, but because it reminded them why it existed. Every December, Ethan and Noah returned to the Port Authority bus terminal, not to look for miracles, but to become part of one. They helped families traveling for medical emergencies, carried bags for the elderly, stayed late when no one else wanted to, and sometimes, when the light hit the floor just right and the terminal grew quiet for a brief moment, Ethan would feel it again, that warmth, that presence, a reminder that miracles don't end when the impossible happens. They begin when someone decides to live differently afterward. 3 years passed, not all at once, not easily. They passed the way real healing always does, one ordinary day at a time. By the winter of 2026, the Port Authority bus terminal looked the same to most people, the same echo of rolling luggage, the same impatience in hurried footsteps, the same crowds that never stopped moving. But to Ethan Carter, it was no longer the place where he almost died. It was the place where he learned how to live. Carry Hope had grown beyond what he and Noah first imagined. What began as a single van and a handful of moving jobs had become a small but steady operation, one that quietly did something most companies refused to do. They hired people others overlooked, men and women with injuries, chronic pain, limited mobility, stories that didn't fit neatly into resumes. They adapted schedules, modified equipment, designed roles around people instead of forcing people to fit roles, and somehow, against every business prediction, it worked. Customers noticed something different: the care, the patience, the dignity. They didn't just move furniture, they carried lives in transition. Noah, now 18, balanced school with work, learning every part of the operation. He listened more than he spoke, watched how his father treated people with respect that never felt like charity. "You don't save people," Ethan would tell him. "You stand with them until they remember they're strong." Every year, on the same week in December, Ethan and Noah returned to the terminal together, not with banners, not with cameras, just with open hands. They helped families traveling for emergency treatments, carried bags for parents too tired to ask, stayed late when the terminal thinned and the need didn't. Sometimes people asked why they did it. Ethan never gave a long answer. "Someone once carried something for me," he would say. "Now it's my turn." On one quiet afternoon, as sunlight spilled across the terminal floor the same way it had years before, Noah stood beside his father near Gate 79. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" Noah asked gently. "The accident, the pain, all of it." Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched a young couple struggle with a stroller, stepped forward without thinking, lifted the heavy end, smiled. Then he came back. "I wish you hadn't had to grow up without me," he said honestly. "I wish I hadn't lost so much time." Noah nodded. "But," Ethan continued, "if losing my legs is what taught me how to carry others, then no, I don't wish it away." He looked down at his feet, strong, steady, real. "I don't believe God gives pain to teach lessons," he said, "but I believe he never wastes it." That night, Ethan stood alone near the exit doors after everyone else had gone. The terminal was quieter than usual. He closed his eyes, and for just a moment he felt it again. That same warmth, that same stillness, that same sense of being seen, not as a man who was healed, but as a man who chose to keep walking after the healing. Ethan whispered a thank you, not for the miracle, but for the responsibility that came with it. Because he had learned something that changed everything. The miracle wasn't the moment he stood up. The miracle was the choice he made before it, to carry something that wasn't his to carry, when it cost him everything. And maybe that's how miracles still work, not as rewards for the perfect, not as proof for the doubting, but as answers to ordinary people who say yes before they know how it will turn out. If you're listening to this right now and you feel tired, if you feel like you've been carrying more than you were meant to, this story isn't just about Ethan. It's about you, about the burden you didn't ask for, the responsibility that scares you. The moment you're standing in right now, wondering if you can take one more step. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need perfect faith. You just need the courage to carry what's in front of you today. If this story spoke to you, subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us so you don't walk alone. Share it with someone who might need hope. And in the comments, tell us, what are you carrying right now? Our community reads every message. We pray over them. And we believe that the same God who met Ethan on a terminal floor still meets people exactly where they are. Sometimes, right in the middle of the crowd. Sometimes, when no one else is looking. And sometimes, when you decide to carry hope forward, one step at a time.